Barack Obama has issued a rallying cry to the world, demanding all nations work together to solve the twin problems of climate change and the financial crisis. In a major speech at the United Nations, the President also sent a blunt warning on nuclear weapons to rogue nations Iran and North Korea. Australia's Prime Minister took up the case on all three fronts in his UN address, but both men were overshadowed by an eccentric display from a dictator. North America correspondent Lisa Miller.
From around the world they come, once a year to share the stage at the United Nations. Libya's President, Muammar Gaddafi, made it for the first time in 40 years. It was the first time too for US President Barack Obama, who wanted to set a new tone, promising an era of engagement.
We can be a generation that chooses to see the shoreline beyond the rough waters ahead.
But he also offered a blunt challenge to America's critics.
Those who used to chastise America for acting alone in the world cannot now stand by and wait for America to solve the world's problems alone.
There was warm applause for the president, but he'd left the chamber by the time the next speaker got to his feet.
Please be seated.
Muammar Gaddafi's speech was boycotted by some. Those that stayed probably wished they hadn't. For almost 2 hours, the eccentric Libyan president accused the United Nations Security Council of being like Al-Qaeda, bemoaned the hardship of jet lag and suggested swine flu was man-made.
Perhaps this swine virus may be one of those viruses that was created in the laboratory and it got out of control because it was meant in the beginning to be used as a military weapon.
Colonel Gaddafi caused a furore before he'd even arrived after demanding to pitch an air-conditioned tent for his receptions. Knocked back by Central Park, the tent was erected 50 kilometres north of the city. But it was his presence at the UN that caused a storm, just months after the release of the man who'd been jailed for bombing the Pan Am flight over Lockerbie.
The families of the victims are still seething over the warm welcome the Lockerbie bomber got when he returned to Libya, and they're just as angry now that that country's president is getting what they see as a red carpet treatment at the UN in New York.
Back inside, diplomats were walking out of a speech by Iran's President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, who renewed his attack on Israel. After a day of meetings, including with Israeli and Palestinian leaders, Kevin Rudd delivered his speech, the last of the evening.
The Honourable Kevin Rudd.
And he returned to an issue that's dominated this week, the urgent threat of global warming.
For us all, this will be a test of our leadership.
That's a theme the G20 will hear when it now meets in Pittsburgh. Lisa Miller, ABC News, New York.